Is Ashley DeMuro? Okay. So, Mr. Parker, we glad that you're with us this morning. And
Well, first of all, let me say that I'm glad to be here after listening to a lot of the discussion this morning. I'm not sure where I will begin, so I'll just begin. First of all, let me thank you for giving me an opportunity to just share with you some of our experiences in Washington, D.C. Let me give you a little bit of my history. I taught D.C. public schools for 30 years. I still am a certified mathematics teacher on leave of absence from D.C. public schools to work as a senior fellow right now with Students First. I come to you to talk somewhat to give you that experience and to also speak regarding the seniority issue. And probably as a union president, I'm probably one of the few past union presidents you'll ever have to testify against seniority. But I hope that I can give you some reasons as to why I don't believe seniority has any real purpose and meaning for impact on the education of our children today. I also come to you from a background of having grown up like many of the children today who we are failing in terms of our education system. I grew up in the South, rural South, cotton, tobacco, poverty-stricken. My mother had a third-grade education. My father had to drop out in grade 5. So I learned very early on the importance of an education, and that education was my only way out of poverty, which is the same as it is for many of the children that I'm speaking on behalf here today, and that is children who, without a quality education, they don't stand a chance at any part of the American dream. And talking about seniority, or let's talking about the experience that I had in D.C., and Michael, let me tell you, if he's still here, I've been there. I know exactly what it's like to be a union president having to confront the issue of seniority. Now, and I will talk simply about the seniority piece in as much as in my 30 years of teaching in the District of Columbia Public Schools, I've never had a situation where school district could not furlough or lay teachers off if they got into a budget crisis. So I said to someone the other day, as a union president, I would have loved to have been union president in a state where you cannot furlough teachers based on economic conditions. But with that said, I'll just leave that there. But to talk about party, and we dealt with this in the District of Columbia, and I'll be happy to entertain some questions later, but let me just say this. I was not always where I am now in terms of seniority. I was president of the Washington Teachers Union in Washington, D.C. During the time Michelle Rhee was there. And we went through a lot of battles about seniority. I can tell you that my original position on seniority was one that most union presidents and union officers hold, and that is, in the union we have two sacred cows, seniority and tenure. It doesn't necessarily have to make sense while we hold those as sacred cows, but I can remember my first part of union training was you don't mess with and you don't discuss seniority and you don't discuss tenure. Well, I can tell you my first 2 years as a union president, that was my position. Whenever I went to the negotiating table, if the superintendent wanted to talk about seniority, I came up with many of the same reasons that Michael came up with today. Why seniority is a good thing. Why we don't need to bother tenure. And I'll just, if you just bear with me for a moment, I'll give you an experience that began to shake myself. I was at an elementary school to shape my opinion. I was at an elementary school speaking one day as a union president. So, you know, the little kids, they'll ask you, what do you do as a union president and those kind of things. And so I said, well, as a union president, I make sure that your teachers get the kind of support, the resources and things that they need to be able to give you a good quality education. And then I also said, I make sure that you have the best teachers. Well, when I was getting ready to leave, this little girl, I guess she was 7 or 8, just came up to me and just hugged me. You know, and children can give you some really just undying love. But I was wondering, and I asked her, so why did you hug me? And she says, because you said you care about us and you make sure we have the best teachers. And so as I was driving back to the office, as a union president, I began to think, and I said to myself, you know, you lied to that little girl. You don't really care whether or not she has the best teachers in front of her. Because right now, you at the negotiating table, and you're fighting the chancellor tooth and nail, trying to hold on to seniority as a basis for furloughing, laying off, or eliminating teachers. And so I had to have a conversation with myself. And that conversation was I going to hold on to my union teachings of seniority is a sacred cow? Or was I going to analyze, having to look at it this way, and that is, in decision making about education, either we're going to make decisions that are children-based or decisions that are adult-based. And as a union president, I realized I was making decisions that were more adult-based, because that's what seniority is. It's about adult-based. It's not about children-based. Because I could never, as a union president, and I kind of see Michael didn't do the same either, could never really come up with an educationally sound reason why seniority should be the basis of furloughing teachers, laying teachers off, or eliminating positions. It's just how education, as a union, once I decided that was a reality, that holding on to seniority had no educational value, because listen, how long you teach has nothing to do with how good you're teaching. So the question became, which is more important, how long or how good? And so approach to eliminate seniority as a basis for furloughing, for even to the extent of transferring teachers from one school within a district. We eliminated seniority, period. Now, there were a lot of battles in doing that and trying to get it right. But I can tell you this, we put this in the contract, and even the teachers within the district voted 80% in favor of removing seniority as the basis of deciding who goes and who stays. And I think that is very critical, because our children who without a good education don't stand a chance at life. They need a great education, and a great education has to start with great teachers. And whenever you have to, unfortunately, if it's a situation where you have to have a furlough, then it makes sense that you would always want to put the best teachers in front of children. If you got 10,000 teachers and you can only have 9,500, it would make sense that we would want to put the best 9,500 teachers in front of our children, especially those children who are the most vulnerable, and without having a great teacher, they don't stand a chance at life. I think that performance has to carry more weight than seniority in any of these situations. Now, as I said before, I was not at this point at the very beginning, because I was talking primarily, when I started as a union president, there are certain union rules. But as I began to talk about, do I really care about the children, like myself, who without a quality education, they're not going to make it? I began to look at, does this have any sound educational value? And it doesn't. It doesn't anymore. That how good a teacher is much more important than how long a teacher has been teaching. And I'll stop with that and entertain some questions if you have.
Well, thank you, Mr. Parker, and I have a question here. So what was the result of all that? As you and Michelle Ray changed the concept of seniority, can you just briefly tell us, did that improve the education in Washington?
Well, you know, I can proudly say now that I believe so. This year, because we did this in 2010. We had a long battle now. It wasn't, we went through the same kind of discussions we had today, and I can tell you it was not an easy process to come to an agreement on it. But once we did, if we look at the results of the kids in DC today, they had the greatest growth on NAEP, the test, the National Assessment NAEP scores in the country. And I think it was a direct impact or result of those policies that we put in place back in 2010.
And that's amazing. That truly is. I'm kind of, I'm just gratified to hear that those results that you're sharing with us this morning.
The results have been very, very encouraging. And this year, I think we really saw the benefit. And I think it took maybe 2 to 3 years for it to really take effect, because what has happened is you find that the decision-making process now is that we found that, first of all, teachers have gotten more serious because they know now seniority does not protect their job. It's about performance. And in fact, and as a matter of fact, I did not find the issue of the district was getting rid of senior teachers to save money. That was one of the things we talked about, and that was one of my big concerns as a union president, was that if we're no longer using seniority, then how to prevent the district or prevent a principal from deciding, well, if I can get rid of the veteran teacher who has an $80,000 salary, I can buy me 2 younger teachers with a $40,000 salary. And we dealt with this by making it very clear, number one, that it would be a violation for a principal to consider salary. And in cases where we found that, then I made it clear as a union leader we were going to take action, because the bottom line here was that, first of all, the school district or the school board would not be doing its job effectively if they were concerned more with saving money than they were with making sure they have the best teachers in front of the students. And in the district, it turned out that we didn't have a problem with the concept of more veteran teachers with civil service in his work.
And then my last question is this. So when Washington, D.C. recruits teachers, based on what you have shared with us with that seniority, have the number of teachers who want to teach in the school system, have that increased? Do you see more teachers who want to get into the system, knowing the system now, or do you find enthusiasm?
Now, one of the things has to do with salary, but I think, you know, I taught 30 years, and let me tell you, knowing who the best teachers are is not rocket science, right? All you have to do is, if you taught school, is go and sit in the teacher's lounge. Every teacher in the building knows who's teaching, who's the great teachers and who are the bad teachers. They know it. The children know it. Now, that's different. Now, our challenge is how do we transfer that to a process, an evaluation process. But it's not hard to know who the great teachers are. All right? Even as a union president, when I was saving the job of a bad teacher, I knew it. I saved the jobs of some teachers I wouldn't let get near my little granddaughter. All right? You know who the great teachers are. And so I think the key becomes now is whether or not we have the courage to make decisions that are in the best interest of children when it comes down to, and it would be a great situation if it was always what's best for the child and what's best for the adult is the same. But sometimes that's not the case. And such case would be when you have to furlough, all right, what's best for the child is to put what's best for the teachers may be, especially if you're a senior teacher, is to use seniority. But whenever those conflicts occur, I think it's a matter, do we have the courage to base our decision-making and make it child-centered or make it adult-centered? And I think child is the...
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Parker, for your compelling testimony. I'm interested in the subject of recruiting and retaining the best and the brightest to become educators, to remain in the field of education. And during the previous testimony, there was a question and answer portion of that testimony that seemed to indicate school districts with the flexibility to manage their budgets, to make personnel decisions, and then making those decisions based on seniority alone would somehow deter the best and the brightest from entering the profession and remaining in the profession. The educators that I've talked to, particularly young people who are entering the profession today, they're motivated primarily by the desire to have a positive impact on young people, to have a transformative impact on young people, to prepare young people for college and for career and to be productive citizens. I don't get the sense that they're motivated by salary or pay, though that's important to anyone that's graduating college and has taken out loans to graduate college. I take some exception to that dialogue, because I actually think a system in which, as a young educator, impact or not, in the event there's a layoff, you're the first person out the door. I think that serves to deter talent from entering the profession, and a system in which everyone is essentially treated as equal, regardless of performance, with exception to seniority. I think that discourages profession.
That's a very good inquiry there. Let me tell you what my experiences were. First of all, as a classroom teacher, but more so that teachers don't particularly want to teach with bad teachers. All right, they don't want bad teachers there either. Teachers are very often conflicted, because as union leaders, we say to our teachers, that's your brother, that's your sister. So it's not your responsibility to turn on them or et cetera. But I always say to teachers, a bad teacher today affects your outcome. But from a union perspective, here's what I found with younger teachers. Younger teachers felt that seniority was actually unfair, because and I can tell you, one of the things that as a union president that I used to worry about with young teachers is, for God's sake, if some of them got smart enough to realize that actually as a union president, I was discriminating against them because they paid the same union dues as the rest, did not provide them the same level of job security. Because pretty much what I was saying to the younger teachers is that you're going to pay your $35 per pay period, just like the veteran teachers, but the veteran teacher is going to have more job security. So in reality, actually, is union discrimination, because all teachers should be treated the same. That if you have all of my union members should be treated fairly. The younger teachers, they're paying the same amount of money as the veteran teachers. They should have the same opportunity and chance to stay employed. And that's what performance does. Performance, if you are a teacher and your experience is valuable, your experience will show it in your work. My mother used to have a saying that, judge me by the work I do. It'll show.
Chair thanks the gentleman and recognizes Representative Truitt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Parker, for your testimony. I'm still hiding over here behind Representative Conklin. I really enjoyed your arguments for and against this legislation. The arguments in favor of it seem to focus on the children, and the arguments against it seem to focus on the teacher, as you pointed out. What I would like to know is if you have data reverse touch. In other words, the concerns about how some teachers might be adversely affected because of unfair implementation of a I would think any numbers like that to give us.
I don't have any research-oriented data. I just go by my own experience, and that is one of the things that I discovered, and one of the things that I found that I needed to do with more of my veteran teachers, and that was to make them more open to, as I sometimes were very reluctant or resistant to change their old habit of the black chalkboard with the yellow chalk and to learn the new paradigm. All that there was somewhat of an advantage that younger teachers had over veteran teachers, and that was that the younger teachers were much more open and much more readily willing and able to integrate technology into the classroom setting. And some teachers who had been, quote unquote, with the chalkboard and the chalk for so long were a little slow and took some prodding. But other than that, I saw no advantage or disadvantage in either direction.
Okay, so and that's a great example. Where some veteran teachers might be harmed by a performance evaluation that puts some
this perception. Look, we judge students every day based on their performance, right? I was a math teacher. Parents would have probably come in there and thrown me out of the classroom. Everybody not making a difference. Students are judged on their performance, right? We got students, some will get A's, some get B's. We judge them. There's no difference. Teachers the same. Their performance is what matters. In fact, I've had children, as a matter of fact, and we had this debate, is that does your attendance matter, right? I had this one student, I never forget him, named Little Curtis. Little Curtis would like come to school on Monday and Friday, right? On Monday, Little Curtis come to see. Little Curtis was this ninth grade. He'd be out in the street. On Friday, Little Curtis would come to class. He knew I had a test. Little Curtis would come in and ace the test, and I'd see him again that Monday. Well, the debate was Curtis got 100 average, almost 95 to 100 average. Can I give Curtis that 95? Spends 3 class, and that's 2 days a week, but he got the material. He scores high on my test. I give Little Curtis an A. His performance is an A. I wasn't grading him on attendance. And I think it's the same thing with seniority versus performance. How long you're teaching doesn't matter unless you're performing. And so I think the performance piece has to be the most valuable, period.
Yeah, I completely agree. I guess just the point I was just trying to make is it sounds to me like if we're opposing this legislation, we're putting the concerns of a small number of adults ahead of the concerns of many, many, many more children.
There is no reason why a teacher cannot. On that, a lot of times it's simply that unwillingness to put the work in. You have to learn. You have to keep your pedagogy has to continue to evolve if you're going to be a great teacher. And there's no way around that. I know teachers who our day was from 3 on the way home. I know other teachers, the bell sign at 3:30, at 5:30, they're still there. Well, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to pretty much figure out that teacher who is there at the 5:30 planning every day is probably going to have a better lesson plan and is probably going to have a better performance than the teacher who's out the door every day at 3:30. But then that again goes to self-motivation. There are teachers who continually take ups to improve their craft, and then I had some teachers who I'd have to almost prod them to go take workshops. But that's a personal thing. If you on your own decide you are not going to improve your craft, then that's on you. But you can't hold another person back, even if it's a younger teacher who's improving his or her craft that results in them performing in the classroom, because as a veteran, you decided you were not going to do what's necessary to perform in the classroom.
Thank you, Mr. Parker, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair thanks the gentleman and recognizes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Parker, for being here. Let me ask you a question. And by the way, I agree with most of what you said, and I think a lot of it makes sense. But here's a question I have. Do you think the anxieties of the adults, the fears of an adult, plays any part in how they administer themselves? Impact?
Major.
So moving to a system that takes away from sense of job security, do you think that would have a role in our current teaching force and how they perform their duties, and then ultimately the extension to that could have an impact? So that when you first changed this seniority, did you see an impact to classroom performance?
Well, we changed the seniority system, but we also changed the evaluation system. The evaluation system became tough. Matter of fact, we went to a new evaluation system right away where 50% of the teacher's evaluation was student performance. That created a lot of anxiety. However, the anxiety didn't last very long as people realized they needed to get into it. And now it's a problem.
How did the system handle helping people get into it? Like what was the shift?
Professional development and training, which I think is critical with any evaluation system. It is important that those who have to be evaluated clearly understand how it works. And then secondly, those who are going to implement the evaluation piece they are going to be trained very effectively. One of the things that I would say to teachers is that as frightening as using student data may be to you, one was that could be unfair because it was all based on classroom observation and totally subjective. Now you have an opportunity that 50% of your evaluation is going to be based on your students' performance. And so now's the opportunity to let your teaching speak for you. But the anxiety, I think, had a lot to do with the newness of it, the consequences of it, because 50% of student performance, it certainly could put your job at risk. But I think that the more impactful piece of this was that it caused folks who weren't really teaching to be, let's be honest with you, as a union president, I know I was supposed to say there's no such thing as a teacher's not teaching, but trust me, anybody who's been in classrooms know that there were teachers who are not teaching. That I think one of the positive effects is that it caused people who were not really teaching to really get up and start teaching, because the outcome from students became a part of their evaluation. That I was slow to warm up to this initially until I began to analyze and say that there is a two-part process in education, and that's teaching and the learning. And that previous evaluations where you just simply go in, you go in and you observe that the teachers have the objectives on the board, word walls or whatever, but you never evaluated the second component, which was the learning, because it doesn't do any good for the teacher to teach if the kids aren't learning. I remember I had a college professor who was an advanced calculus teacher. I called it a genius, but my God, everybody in the class, he'd write with one hand and erase with the other. And at the end of the day, we didn't have a clue what he was teaching. So I think that adding student outcomes to that, it completes the cycle when you're doing an evaluation. Not only evaluating your teaching, are you giving out information, but are you getting it out and with children?
Sure.
And you got to make the learning, because I haven't been effective as a teacher unless the children that I teach are learning.
Sure. Now, did you invest, or did this DC system invest additionally into professional development?
Oh my God, yes. And so did offering about 5 classes to about 20 classes just in professional development to help get teachers ready for the new system, and to just talk to teachers in terms of classroom management and those kind of things that we knew they would need in order to really be successful with the new system.
So if you were going to switch to something like this so drastically, you would have to also be anticipating a huge investment in the professional development element of the change.
Investment in terms of time, not necessarily money. You just redirect how you're spending the professional development money to realize you need to train your teachers on how to engage the new event. If it was just fear. With any new change, there's a certain amount of fear. But to remove the fear, but to also know that they knew how to do it and to know that the principals knew how to implement it effectively. And so that professional development was great and it was critical.
And that leads to my second part of my and it's policy, the policy component. Outside of just the change on seniority and evaluation, were there other policy things that you needed to shift to allow for teachers' creativity in their classrooms to meet these new obligations? Because one of the things that I've gotten as I've talked to more and more teachers in my district is every couple years with some bright educational idea, there's a change that happens. And then the teachers get on board with it, start ramping up for it, and then 2 years later, there's another change that happens. So it really dampens and kind of destroys their abilities to really believe in the system and become creative in the system and to become experts in the system. So when we start evaluating them, it becomes difficult, ever-changing system. So are there other policy things that you did in D.C. that you think also help to empower the teachers in their creativity?
I think that one of the positives, and I think it's important with any evaluation system, that sometimes we look at an evaluation system simply as a avenue for evaluating how well somebody is doing. But an evaluation system also should be used as a support mechanism. And so one of the things, in other words, when a teacher was evaluated and you saw that a teacher may be having difficulties in a certain area, then that teacher had a support plan that was to focus on those specific areas. That's something that you have to do. So the level of support is critical.
And thank you for you being here. And I just wanted to have a comment about Little Curtis. If we had a system that was really in the 21st century and created a individualized learning plan for Little Curtis, he would have been accelerated
every day.
Yeah.
He would have.
Yeah.
And I realized that.
Yeah.
He would have been there every
No
day.
doubt. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair thanks the gentleman and recognizes Representative Krieger.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Parker, for your very interesting testimony. First, a comment. I was intrigued by your comment that 80% of the teachers were on board with this finally, and I would just wonder out loud. I believe a great majority of our teachers in Pennsylvania would long for a system where they could be treated fairly and judged on their performance. So that's just a comment. But my question is this. You heard some of the testimony previously in questions of both Secretary Dumaresque and Mr. Crossley regarding this concern about manipulation of the evaluation system to in essence, get rid of the higher paid teachers. You mentioned in your testimony that you had addressed that in Washington. I wonder if you could give us a little more detail about how you did that.
The manipulation of the evaluation system?
Yeah, so there was some testimony previously. The concern was that would be manipulated by the administrators and by the school districts to essentially get rid of the higher paid teachers. How did you address that in Washington?
Well, one of the things is as we look evaluation system, first of all, the evaluation system was one that, first of all, was very, very valid. All right. The other piece was having both the teachers and principals receive the same training and how it was interpreted. And I think that the other piece is simply the integrity of the principal, the integrity of the teacher, and the integrity of the school district to ensure that the evaluation system is implemented fairly. it doesn't matter what type of situation, always the possibility of an element of someone abusing or misusing. So the issue of whether or not there's integrity in implementation, that's going to exist regardless. And it becomes incumbent school districts and principals and everyone else in the professional development to make sure that people understand, both teachers and principals, what the intent of the language and the evaluation process is, but to also monitor, right? So even one of the things we did as a union was that if you feel that you received an unfair evaluation or there was something wrong, let's talk about it early on, and then have an upfront conversation with the principal and et cetera. And I think it helped to solve a lot of the unnecessary problems that would have arisen.
Chair, thanks to the gentleman, and, and recognizes Representative Conklin.
I want to thank you, Mr. Parker. First off, as a union carpenter since '77, I take a lot of pride seeing how proud you are to be a past union member. I'm glad to see that you
Actually,
recognize
I still
the
am a
importance
union member.
Oh, no, I recognize that. Thank you. Second off, talking about little Mr. Curtis, I wished I would have had you as a teacher, because all my teachers made sure that part of their criteria was showing up, doing your homework, and testing. We're all judged equally. I wished I would have had you as a teacher. I may have only showed up Mondays and Fridays as well, but thank you for that. You know, listening to some of the folks that have asked you questions, I became intrigued by what you would see as a testing measure, because in the reason I ask you this, on a little bit of the research I've done on Michelle, one student first, they rank Louisiana, Florida, and Indiana as their best examples of education systems. When we look at it, the Louisiana ranks 49th in math, Florida ranks 5th. With the onvent that Pennsylvania is looking at all these testing measures for teachers, could you give us a little bit of insight how you and your organization feels it should be done, seeing how your rankings of other states, that you put those at the bottom testing score at the top for the way they do business? Could you tell us a little bit how you would envision that testing be done, and what should be the criteria for testing students?
When you say the testing of...
You know, the students, when I look at Michelle ranked her top 3 as Louisiana.
What do you mean in
#1.
terms of the state
Yeah,
rankings?
as good school, as they like states where where it was done the best, that they rank like Louisiana #1, but Louisiana ranks 49th in math according to the national testing scores. Florida ranks, you put national testing scores puts Florida at 35th. You put Indiana #3, but the national testing scores put them at 30th. I find it intriguing that, seeing how we're going to, testing, how you would envision what students should be tested on as the #1 criteria.
Okay, well, let me say this first. I'm not familiar enough with the criteria that was used in terms of ranking the states to actually speak to it intelligently. So I don't want to try to explain how that was done. Now, your question was...
Yeah. Feel that students as an outcome basis. Do you feel it should be a standardized test, that the score of the student should be used as they are today on a national level, or do you think that we should open it up to other criteria as well?
Okay, my personal opinion, and I use the concept of student performance, all right? Now, student performance doesn't always mean one standardized test on one single day. There are some subject areas, for example, where there are no standardized tests nationally, or even within some school districts where you have those. And so when I look at student performance, I think that there could be several ways of maintaining accurate data on students' performance that may not now include in standardized tests. Yes, that could be a means. My personal feeling is that a variety of avenues. For example, I'm a very big supporter of student portfolios, in terms of, but I do believe this is that any teacher, that if you get a child in your classroom, and and the child, when you get that child is at point A, all right, and that child comes to school X number of days, let's say if there's 180, 150 of them, I think that any teacher should be able to demonstrate that if I got little Johnny in September or August, and little Johnny was at a point A, and little Johnny came to my class 150 out of 180 days, I ought to be able to say to somebody that little Johnny grew. And if little Johnny didn't grow, then the problem isn't little Johnny. The problem is the teacher. Now, a teacher could have a portfolio where I can say, here is where I got little Johnny. Here is a series of assessments where little Johnny has demonstrated he has grown from point A to B. That if you got a child on day one and that child attended your class for X number of days, that child grew. And if that child didn't grow, the problem is not the child, it's the teacher. Right, where it can't be manipulated. I mean, where as a teacher, I'm not going to just create something that's not real, so it has to be great monitoring. But I do believe that a variety of avenues could be used to show student growth, but the students' growth should be a part of it.
Okay. Chair, thanks, gentlemen. Mr. Parker, do you have other educators and educational organizations coming into Washington to just review and to observe what is happening there? Because certainly you have a great story to tell.
There are other.
You elaborate on that a little bit?
There now. I mean, I finally beginning to be a good story. And I can tell you, when Michelle first came there, I was against change. I was a regular union person that is like, let's keep the status quo, until I just had as Oprah calls it, an aha moment, that I was really fighting for adult issues, and I didn't know how to combine the two, how to be a union president and fight for teachers, but at the same time, and it's the same problem that most union presidents have today as far as teacher unions, how to fight on behalf of your teachers, but at the same time, take on the responsibility for quality education for children. And when there is a conflict, which side do you favor? What benefits the teacher or benefits the children? And once I made it clear in my mind that when the conflict arises, I was going to do what's necessary to benefit the children, that made it much easier for me as a union president to make decisions.
Mr. Parker, thank you very much for your testimony here this afternoon. It's been very informative, very helpful to the members of the committee, and we certainly appreciate you being with us. And Ashley DeMuro, who is also with Student First, we thank for her report on this as well. So
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We've been going